I'm a conservative because it's the right thing to do.
Maybe Joseph Bakke from New York, conservative because I believe in self-preservation, self-reliance, and the protection of liberty.
My name is Joy Bricker. I was born a conservative and I intend to die a conservative.
Breakthrough here. I think we made some news. I think Governor Polanyi got it right. Well, he got a lot of things right, but you know, way back when in his ancestry, I bet Barack Obama was French. Somewhere, somehow, there's some French genes in that guy. All right, moving right along. Well, first off, I've got to remind you all, the straw poll closes at 1 o'clock. Please get your votes in before then. All right. Right now, we're continuing our parade of tough conservatives, the guys who are not in the M&M Bowl, and coming up is Steve King. I've got to tell you a little bit about my own personal experience with Steve King. I got to address the Conservative Opportunity Society a couple of months ago, and walking into that room with, I guess about 15 or 16 congressional members, there was enough energy, enough conservative energy in that room. If I could have plugged Steve King in, we could have powered Washington for a month. Which probably be a bad idea because we want the power to go off down here sometimes. All right, to introduce Congressman King, let me introduce Kane Robinson. He's the Executive Director of General Operations for the National Rifle Association, past President of the NRA, currently serves as a member of the NRA's Executive Council. While on the Board of Directors, Robinson served as a member of the Executive Committee, long-term Chairman of the Legislative Policy Committee, Chairman of the Board for the NRA Whittington Center in Raton, New Mexico, and he came to this after 4 years in the Marine Corps and in Vietnam, an American hero. Ladies and gentlemen, Kane.
Well, first thing I'd say about Steve King, he's my friend. I was chairman of the Iowa Republican Party, and he is a whirlwind. He grew up in a law enforcement family in Storm Lake, Iowa, built King Construction Company starting in 1975 with one bulldozer. Steve King has built stuff. That's important. 6 years in the Iowa State Senate, he was chairman of the State Government Committee and vice chairman of the Oversight and Budget Committee. Oops! The bureaucrats soon found a guy, he didn't like new spending, he didn't want new programs, a tough businessman who demanded less spending and lower taxes. He put the inheritance tax on the chopping block, passed other tax cuts, and made English the official language of Iowa. The huge Iowa congressional district in the western part of the state needed a congressman in 2002. In the primary, you'll like this, your organizers, in the primary, the Speaker of the Iowa House of Representatives, he was a moderate, he was running. The wealthy state senator from the largest city in the district, he was running. From Washington, the House Republican Campaign Committee sent people to work for their favorite candidate. The RNC sent people to work for their favorite candidate. But Steve King, he assembled a super grassroots campaign, fought for every vote. After a long struggle through the primary and convention process, he out-organized everybody, and he won. In the general election, overwhelmingly elected. Overwhelmingly elected every time since. In Congress, King landed on the Judiciary Committee and its Constitution Subcommittee. That's a problem for liberals because he actually believes in the Constitution. What a thought. Steve is the top Republican on the Immigration Subcommittee, where he believes the immigration issue boils down to a couple of things. The rule of law, determining how many people should be let in and sticking to it, and that a country without borders is simply a place, not a sovereign nation. He's fearless. He's Iowa's George Patton, Congressman Steve King.
Stand of the people of this land. This is our country. Thank you all very much. You know, it's always hard to live up to an excellent introduction, and I think I'm going to be tested in that regard. Boy, I just really like being here at CPAC and getting a chance to talk to all of you. I draw energy from you. And, you know, as I come here and listen to this introduction, and I go back to that time about the test of the primary and general election to be elected to this wonderful honor and privilege of serving the American people in the United States Congress in a constitutional manner, I looked at my congressional district, which is roughly the western third of Iowa. It's shaped kind of like a short-toed boot, roughly rectangular, however. And my opponent said, well, we have more money, we have more political influence, we have more media, we can do all of these things. And I took a look at the map, and someone said, well, don't you live pretty close to the center? I took a nice straight edge on a scale map, and I drew an X on that like you would to find the center of a rectangle. And that X doesn't come to Kyron, Iowa, which is my nearest incorporated community. It comes to southeast corner of Section 28, Wheeler Township, Sac County. And in fact, I will tell you that that X is dead center in the district right over my house. You could stretch a string line from corner to corner. You could drop a plumb bob down my chimney. That's Providence. And so I let them know, of all the money you have, you can't buck Providence. And so now, here we are today with the president. This is going to be the theme that I want to talk to you about. The President Obama has lost his mojo. He came here as the President of the United States with all of this momentum that he created. And by the way, the movement really started in Iowa, more eastern Iowa than my part of the state. And as he built that momentum across the country and he battled against Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton knew more about health care than President Obama did, so President Obama had to get his bona fides up for health care. And so that became a central issue in their primary campaign that was battled out in the caucuses and the primaries across the country. Obama won that, went on to be president, and he was elected and inaugurated with about as much political capital as any president in history. And I had a ringside seat to watch that happen. He had more mojo than any president I remember when he was inaugurated a year and a month ago. But now, the master mesmerizer has lost his mojo. And if we stand our ground as constitutional conservatives, he's not going to get it back. Now, here's what's happened. We're a constitutional republic, not a democracy, as some would say. We're a constitutional republic, and our founding fathers knew the difference. But we have faith in, we're supposed to have at least, faith in our elected representatives. And so when we elected a new Congress in 2008 to extend the majorities that Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid had, and when President Obama was inaugurated on January 20th of 2009, I wrote before that election that if you elect President Obama and Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker, Harry Reid is the Majority Leader, you will have established a ruling troika in America. Those three people can go into a phone booth and do what they will to America, and there's nothing we can do in the short term about it. That's what's happened. They are the ruling troika. You can call this Reid care, you can call it Pelosi care, you can call it Obama care, and I call it all those things. I also call it troika care. It's the three-way ruling elite that's now running this country. But we have, as American people, we have to entrust our faith in our elected representatives. And so, when we had the economic crisis that befell us, when Henry Paulson came to the Capitol September 19th, 2008, and had his Chicken Little routine, and he said, the sky is falling, I need $700 billion right now to prop the sky up. And we sat there and said, you're in a different arena now. But he made one run at it, and we voted it down. He made another run at it, and it passed. And Henry Paulson got his $700 billion in two different components. That's when the American people started to get really nervous about what they saw happening in Washington, D.C. And then, along through that path of things that happened, we saw the nationalization of huge private sector entities. We saw the nationalization of Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, the insurance company. Along came Citigroup, nationalized, Bank of America, and now the American people are starting to think, what have we wrought? The people we put in charge are making decisions to punish the private sector and nationalize that growth engines that have been created by free market capitalism. but they trusted that their elected leaders knew more about Wall Street than they did. And now we find out that we know more about Wall Street than the people in Wall Street know about Wall Street. Unless it was their business model to game the taxpayers, in which case then I will give the nod to the Wall Street brokers. But we saw the nationalization of 8 huge private sector entities, but I've only named 6. Right after that came General Motors and Chrysler. Now, we may not know Wall Street, but Americans know cars. And we know that if you're going to shut down 3,400 dealerships in America and you're going to ice out the secured bondholders that by legitimate right of law held that security for General Motors and Chrysler and hand it over to the trade unions on the voice of the President of the United States, who fired the CEO of General Motors and replaced and hired all but 2 board members of General Motors and put in place a car czar that was 31 years old, that had never made a car, had never sold a car. I haven't seen evidence that he ever owned a car, but if I did, I'd want to ask him if it was an American-made car. And we lost faith in the White House. I wonder why. We knew more than they know. The cars are 31 years old. That was kind of the end of the line for this leap of faith that the American people endorsed the president and the majorities, the Pelosi and Reid majorities, the troika with. And now, we're bludgeoned and beaten by that, and we've watched, according to the Wall Street Journal, 1/3 of the private sector profits nationalized within this last year and a half or so. And right behind that came $787 billion in economic stimulus plan. There was another blank check for the President of the United States to pay off his political benefactors. And here we sit today with an economy that spiraled downwards. The President of the United States has concluded this, and he said this a year ago before a conference meeting with Republican members of Congress. He said that the New Deal under FDR, back in the Great Depression, actually did work, but it would have worked better if FDR hadn't lost his nerve. But FDR lost his nerve and was afraid he was spending too much money, so he pulled back. And when he pulled back in the second half of the 30s, then that's when you saw unemployment go up and you had a recession within a depression, according to the Keynesian economist on steroids named Barack Obama. Well, I'm not a Keynesian economist on steroids. I'm a free marketeer. I have read every word of Wealth of Nations, and I believe it. And they're celebrating the anniversary of the signature on the economic stimulus plan, STEM 1, and now they've got Son of STEM or STEM 2 they're trying to bring past us again for roughly $100 billion. Now, are Americans nervous about all of this? Absolutely, we are. And I tell you this story because that's how we got here. We got here with this whole string of TARP, the nationalization of 8 huge entities, and an economic stimulus plan, and then on top of that, then we went right into what was next last summer in July? Cap and trade. Cap and tax, that you know. Now, sometimes leadership will give an advice that will be, don't argue the science, you've already lost that argument, just argue the economics of cap and tax. Well, I will tell you, if there's ever a premise that you disagree with, never concede a premise. Never, never concede a premise. The liberals, the environmentalists, the extremists, the Al Gores of the world were wrong on the science. And today we know it. And I have an Al Gore shower at my place, and I took my drill bit out with an 1/8-inch bit in it, and I drilled all the holes out, so now I can take a shower in 3 minutes instead of 12. Sorry, Al. But I've got a scoop shovel for you if you want to come any place in the 50 states in America. For the first time in the history of keeping records, there's snowfall on the ground in all 50 states. It's tough to make an argument when the evidence is all around us with a snowy white wonder in a crystal cathedral. And so we went through all of these ramifications, and we came out the other side with this. The American people lost their faith in the government. They believed that they lost their handle on government, and they rose up. And we had Tea Party patriots that rose up across this country, the 9/12 group that met here last year. Go! Many other days. April 15th, There's another date. I was in South Carolina that day. I'll never forget that, the opportunity to be there and be part of that. Constitutional conservatives stepping up to take America back. But you know, one thing that Sun Tzu wrote about was, know Shea Hostum, know thine enemy. Now, who are we up against? And I want to define that enemy. They are liberals, they are progressives, they are Che Guevarians, they are Castroites, they're socialists, more enemies on this list, Gramsciites, ring anybody's bell? Trotskyites, Maoists, Stalinists, Leninists, Marxists. They're all our enemies. Who'd I leave out? I think I heard that. How about I go to Democratic Socialists? And I'm going to ask you to go to the dsausa.org website and take a look and see what you find there. The Democratic Socialists of America, they are the socialists. There is a game plan on there. That game plan looks suspiciously like President Obama's game plan. It says on there that they want to nationalize the major corporations and take them over. And they want to manage those for the benefit of the people affected by them. That would be for the trade unions and perhaps the customers. And so when I asked Timothy Geithner in writing, as part of a hearing that we had, and so he's essentially under oath, present for me his exit strategy to denationalize these 8 huge entities. 2 months later, his 7-page letter came back, and after my lawyers analyzed it all, it came down to this: well, I will do that if the time is right, and I'm the only one that will know. This is the president's plan. Don't believe he ever shed a tear over nationalizing any of those companies. It's in his playbook. The Democratic Socialists of America is the playbook that I've seen unfold. I ask you to go to that website and address that. And I could read you some things off of that. But the big pieces of the Obama agenda have been cap and tax, socialized medicine, comprehensive amnesty. I believe that any combination of those are transformative to America and debilitating to our liberty and our freedom. I want them all dead. I want to kill all those bills. And by the way, I don't want to meet with the President of the United States to see what other kind of toxic stew he's going to serve up to us. And it is a toxic stew. I mean, they started out with they were going to cook up this health care for America, so what do? They get a big pot out and they decide, how do you start with cooking up this stew? So they reached into that 15-year-old shelf and they pulled Hillary Care off of it, that big old tainted soup bone. They dropped it down in that pot and started to cook up this single-payer socialized medicine. Then they found out that the flavor was tainted, so they threw a few more things in, thinking they could convince us we ought to eat that. And after all of these months of debate and negotiations, it comes down to this. If you start out with tainted stew, there is no part of it that Americans want. We don't want a pot full. We don't want a bowl full. We don't want a spoonful, a cup full, or any kind of measure of toxic stew called socialized medicine. We want it dead. Throw it out and start over. And if the President of the United States wants to negotiate with the leaders of the Republicans, or if he wants to negotiate with the people who are leading philosophically among Republicans, or conservatives, or constitutional conservatives, here are the conditions, Mr. President. First, concede that that toxic stew has to be thrown out. That's one. Second one is, this reconciliation package, the idea of running 2 bills through, pass the Senate bill in the House, and then the negotiated piece that's going on right now in secret, bringing that through the Senate under reconciliation, which Democrats called the nuclear option. Now the wording's changed to reconciliation. That sounds real nice and gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's the nuclear option when they named it before. Passing that bill through and jamming this in the American people directly against your will. That's what they want to do. That's what they're talking about doing. The President has got to say the whole package of Troika care is off the list. And the nuclear option, reconciliation, is also off the table. And now Republicans need to make a concession. We need to say our complete holistic approach to this is a pretty big, complicated piece of legislation. However good the components are, let's also take that off the table, because we know what happens. If you have two ideas out there and you've got to put them together in order to get the votes to get them to pass, it probably says that those ideas aren't good enough to stand on their own. I want standalone legislation. And I want standalone legislation that the American people can see clearly is negotiated in the transparency of the light of day. And I want to start with this: lawsuit abuse reform. The trial lawyers in this country, some call them ambulance chasers, I call them trial lawyers, are tapping into the health care costs in America to the tune of 8.5%. That's $203 billion a year, $2 trillion over the course of a bill. And the Troika will not take one dime out of the pockets of the trial lawyers. Let's start with that. Mr. President, if you're serious about negotiating, then let's do all of the things that I've said, take all of those things off the table. Let's set lawsuit abuse reform up as a standalone. Let's pass that, put it on President Obama's desk as a measure of his sincerity in wanting to have bipartisan negotiations. And if he will not do that, I guarantee you we will get a lot better deal after November, after the election. Thanks very much. God bless you.
Of the people of this land.
Now, he's one of those guys who's not an M&M Republican. He knows the difference between being on the guest list and being on the menu. All right, moving right along. Let's